derivatives contracts, which are tied to collateral of dubious value. So, which is to say that you've got a quadrillion-dollar market and a multi-trillion-dollar daily Forex market based on a foundation of collateral that by most standards of accounting you would have to say is worthless. And therefore, people are looking looking at gold again. Now, James Rickards, who's pretty well regarded as a financial analyst, is making the point that if you were to go through one of these historic switches out of paper and back to gold, as we've seen many times, in order to reconcile all this paper, you've got to get a gold to be, $25,000 an ounce. Now that's just dividing the derivatives out there by the number of gold that is above the surface of the earth. So is that an extremist prediction, or is that a realistic prediction, or how would you put that analysis into your frame of thinking, John?
Well, the way I look at it is I look at the true value of gold and silver is really its weight. So when we look at gold, and if we're really talking about, I don't know whether Jim Rickards was speaking of returning to a gold standard, but if we're returning to a gold standard, then the true value of gold, then gold is measured by its weight. So when it's measured against a fiat currency, that's not really a true gold standard. So to begin with, if we were going to go back to a gold standard, we'd have to basically purge the system, like you said, of these quadrillions of derivatives, of these trillions of new dollars, euros, yen, that central bankers have produced. So we actually wouldn't even be dividing by the existing amount of currencies if we were to return to a true gold standard, because we have to purge a system of all this extraneous creation of currencies.
Right. You were breaking up there, so I didn't quite catch everything you were saying. But what I gathered is that you don't think you can do this idea of comparing the revaluing all the paper out there against gold, because can you just review that because of the weight issue? I didn't quite catch what you said there.
Sure. Okay. Well, the way that I look at it, right, if we were looking at a true gold standard again, were we to return to a true gold standard? Under a true gold standard, gold and silver's value is measured by its weight. So today, for example, we measure gold and silver by US dollar price. So I believe it's an incorrect measure of valuation. So when we look at were we to return to a true gold standard, we'd have to purge a system of all the central banker creation of trillions of US dollars, of trillions of yen, of trillions of euros, of trillions of pounds within the past decade. So we would actually want to be dividing by the existing amount of fiat currencies to determine what price. I would actually say that's a price of gold. When Jim Rickards said the price will be $25,000, dollars per ounce, but it's not really the value, because the value actually is the weight, and 1 troy ounce is always 1 troy ounce.
Right. Well, fair enough. So you can't really make the analysis of simply dividing derivatives by the amount of gold to come up with a number. And it seems though that the world is adopting their own gold standard. So it's not hard for people to actually get physical gold. And now, because of the internet, people can trade gold back and forth over the internet. And then if you want to have your life based on a gold, and there are many services now that can do this for you, people can simply go on their own gold standard. Is that potentially a game changer for this whole conversation going forward, because it's a new thing?
Sure, like with the advent of technology, like you said, it's a lot easier to convert your fiat currencies into gold and into physical silver to protect and to preserve your savings, versus leaving it in fiat currencies and constantly having your savings deteriorate, being denigrated by central banker policy. So like you said, every person can go on their own gold standard. And in fact, that's something that I've been advocating for several years now, that people do convert their fiat currencies as much as possible into physical gold and physical silver, because it is quite easy to do today.
All right. So, John, when the bail-ins begin, will physical gold hold, talk about personal gold standard, when the bail-ins begin, are people who own gold going to be vilified the way that we see outrage now on the offshore bank accounts? How will that play in the realm of public opinion? Your thoughts?
Yes, I think that when we start looking forward to people that do have the foresight right now to convert fiat currencies to preserve their savings in physical gold and physical silver, that I think when we look in the West and the East, because there's two prevailing attitudes, right? I think when we look in the East, the Eastern Hemisphere in Asia, there's centuries of tradition, whether it's in China or other Southeast Asian nations that have viewed gold as money, right? So that's not a tradition in the United States. So I don't think actually that it's unfortunate, but I don't think there's going to be enough people in the U.S. that had converted a considerable amount of their savings into physical gold to be vilified, but they will be protected. And in the East, I don't think people will be vilified because gold has always been viewed as money in Asia.
All right, John Kim, we'll leave it at that. Thanks for coming on the Kaiser Report.
Thanks, Max, for having me. It was a pleasure being back on again, and I'll be happy to come back anytime.
Well, that's going to do it for this edition of the Kaiser Report with me, Max Kaiser, and Stacey Herbert. I'd like to thank our guest, John Kim of SmartKnowledgeU.com. If you'd like to get in touch, tweet us at Kaiser Report. Until next time, bye, y'all. Welcome to the Kaiser Report. I'm Max Kaiser. If you spot a mysterious, unexplained creature swimming in the Thames River behind me, don't worry. It's just a city banker dragging boxes of Klein. Welcome to the Kaiser.
Does the Prime Minister recall that at the time after he became Prime Minister under the coalition, and at the time when he was dividing the nation between strivers and scroungers, I asked him a very important question about the windfall he received when he wrote off the mortgage of the premises in Notting Hill, and I said to him he didn't write off the mortgage of the one the taxpayers were helping to pay for at Oxford. I didn't receive a proper answer then. Maybe Dodgy Dave will answer it now. And by the way,
Order. I must ask the honourable gentleman, order. Don't require any assistance from some junior minister. An absurd proposition. I invite the honourable gentleman to withdraw it. I can't reasonably ask the Prime Minister to answer the question. All he has to do is withdraw that word and think of another. Sorry? Sorry? Knows the word beginning with D and ending in Y that he inappropriately used.
Davy, or Davy.
Dodgy, put it
Withdraw.
I know what you're talking about.
Very simple. Withdraw.
This man has done more to the divide this nation than anybody else. He's looked after his own pocket. Still refer to him as Dodgy Dave. Do what you like.
Order. I'm sorry. I must ask the honourable gentleman to withdraw the word. Very well. Under the power given to me by Standing Order number 43, I order the honourable member to withdraw immediately from the House for the remainder of this day's sitting.
He's used to this.
Very well.
Hey, turd teeth. You weren't there, so shut the F up, or I will be revising your future. Hello and welcome to the Metropolitan Elites. And this happened, although I didn't read the news. Yeah, I don't read the Daily Mail. I haven't read the Daily Mail for years. I made a decision not to read it because it's horrible. And obviously, for this YouTube thing, we've been buying newspapers and we've got the Daily Mail. And why is the beautiful Kate, the Duchess of Drab? You go to pages 26 and 27, and it's. I'm a Republican in the sense I don't believe in royals, but I don't really even care. I've just no interest in them at all. But this Duchess of Drab, why does she look awful? Why? What does this? It's just so horrible. Why are you being horrible? And BBC vows to stop actors from mumbling. They're all mumbling. I can't hear them. Oh, and the thing about the Archers isn't real, okay? But in the Daily Mail, we put the Archer's wife on trial. The Radio 4 character who's dividing Britain. I don't know who that is, I don't listen to the Archers. So what's that verdict on our jury of the top male writers? Quentin Lentz says, I find the defendant guilty. It's not even real.
Well, I'll tell you what, I listened to that episode of The Archers.
Really?
And it was grim. It was like EastEnders on steroids. It was like just people wailing and crying and screaming. Oh. It was depressing radio.
That there, it's not political, but that's the Daily Mail in an apolitical way. People enjoying being horrible. That's what it is. Women get selfish around their time of the month.
Okay, well this is quite interesting. Daily Telegraph, Justin Welby. Have you heard this?
No.
Well, apparently he had the DNA test and it's revealed that his father, unknown to him, was actually Winston Churchill's private secretary. Yeah,
he didn't
private
know?
Secretary. He didn't know.
How did he not know? I don't understand. What's the story?
So he believed that his father was Gavin Welby.
Oh, the Telegraph found this out themselves and told him. Is that what he's saying?
So this is a piece of news broken by the Telegraph. So the Telegraph found some evidence that actually Justin Welby's father was
Sir Anthony Montagu Brown.
Oh yeah, so Anthony Montagu Brown, who was Churchill's last private secretary. And they went to him and told him this, and he decided to have a DNA test to get to the bottom of it. Mm-hmm. And it turns out that it's true.
So what was he, adopted? Maybe he was adopted. A liaison. It was a liaison.
So he's a product of an illegitimate affair.
Right.
Eek.
Mm. And he's the Archbishop of Canterbury. Oh my God, it's the Archbishop of Canterbury.
Okay, so we've had the revelation of the Panama Papers this week, a prime bit of investigative journalism, and this.
And this, yeah.
Which I'm sure is very important for
the front page, don't look at the other thing.
Yeah, no. But I really couldn't give a rat's ass about this.
No, the only person who would care is him and his mother. Nobody else cares.
Okay, so
you can tell by the hair proves it. They're a witch.
Let's do the Mail's take on the David Cameron thing.
Does the Prime Minister recall that at the time after he became Prime Minister under the coalition, and at the I still
withdraw the word. Very well. Under the power given to me by Standing Order number 43, I order the honourable member to withdraw immediately from the House for the remainder of this day's sitting.
He's used to this.
Over 1,000
occur. Give him one suggestion, Sir Divert.
Well, it's a very shocking scandal. We now know that the Prime Minister divested.
Very well. Needless to say, no reply is required to that question. We will take next Sir Edward Lee.
Well, it's a very shocking scandal. We now know that the Prime Minister divested himself of all his shareholdings before he became Prime Minister and has paid his taxes in full.
Exactly. Shocking.
Shocking. But there is a wider question which I'd like to ask the Prime Minister about. It follows on the question from the Chair of the Treasury Committee. As long as we have the longest tax code in the world after India, won't hard-working families always use legitimate ways of trying to minimise their tax bill? Some of us have been arguing for years for a flatter tax system to merge rates. Let me give him one suggestion. The best way to stop people avoiding paying inheritance tax, that iniquitous tax, is to abide by our manifesto commitment and abolish it.
Well, I'm very grateful to my honourable friend for his support, and I would say we met our manifesto commitment on inheritance tax, which was to exempt the family home. He's right that we need to simplify, but there's things moving in different directions, which is, one, you want to simplify taxes, but on the other hand, where you see abuses occur, you sometimes need to write new tax code in order to make sure they can't be used, and that can lead to complications. But I'm well aware of his general point and think he's right.
Yvette Cooper. Here.
Could the Prime Minister now answer a question that both he and the Chancellor refused to answer a few years ago, and confirm that they both benefited personally from their cut to the top rate of tax, and on the day that universal credit cuts mean part-timers could be over £1,000 a year worse off, does he think that the several £1,000s a year in which they both benefited are fair?
Well, the information is contained from my tax return. It's in the House of Commons library. Everyone can go and look at it. But the key point is this: since we reduced the top rate of tax from 50 to 45p, we've not only raised more revenue, which is money that we can spend on the public services I know that she supports, but actually the richest 1% in our country are paying a higher overall percentage of income tax at 27%.
Sir Nicholas Soames.
Would my right honourable friend clarify again that tens of millions of our fellow citizens benefit from tax-exempt investments, in that most pension schemes don't pay tax on their investment income, which directly benefits hard-working people saving for and receiving pensions?
Here, here.
So my right honourable friend is absolutely right about that, but I'd also reinforce the point that many millions of our fellow citizens own shares, and many people choose to make their investments through unit trusts, which are a relatively safe form of investment because they share the risk. Many of those unit trusts are listed in other countries, many of them now in Dublin, and they're set up there not to avoid tax, but to make sure that the revenues are returned to the unit trust holder and they then pay tax. And that's the key point.
Caroline Lucas.
Mr. Speaker, does he accept that the revelations last week that he personally intervened in 2013 to water down the effects of EU transparency rules over trusts does damage his efforts to portray himself as some kind of champion of fair tax? And will he now commit to fully support EU transparency rules, including country-by-country reporting by corporations, showing exactly how much profit they make and where?
Let me be absolutely clear with the Honourable Lady. There were no EU proposals. The whole thing was based on a British proposal, a British initiative to encourage all countries to have registers of beneficial ownership. The EU then joined in by suggesting extending it to trusts, and we pointed out that if that happened, no one would take up this proposal, because trusts, as she knows, are set up for all sorts of reasons: the care of a disabled child or the support for a local school, any number of things perfectly reasonable under English common law. And the advice I had was that if we went for this proposal of going for beneficial ownership of companies and trusts, the move that we've made, that is genuinely helping to change the world in this regard, would have completely failed.
Mr. Dominic Grieve.
Mr. Speaker, would my right honourable friend encourage the Leader of the Opposition to write to him to set out in detail the allegations he makes against him, either of breaking the law, of propriety, or the rules of this House? Because I have to say that, having listened carefully to the Leader of the Opposition, I fail entirely to comprehend what it is he is going on about. And on a separate issue, I'm glad to see my right honourable friend stand up for the overseas territories. He will know that at the time when I was Attorney General, I had quite a lot of dealings with the attorneys of the overseas territories in encouraging them to change their transparency rules. And in fact, they showed themselves to be properly responsive to those representations. And you may also agree with me that the overseas territories are entitled to provide financial services and not to be damned for, in fact, trying to ensure the well-being of their own citizens.
No, well, my right honourable friend is absolutely right. What we've tried to do with the overseas territories is say there is a perfectly legitimate business of providing financial services, but they, like us, should be doing it on the basis of high standards, not low standards. I think that is an argument that they now accept and are carrying out, and we should thank them for it. As for the first half of his question, I listened to the right honourable gentleman. I'm not sure I want to read all about it again in a letter, because I don't think there's much to answer.
Mr. Gavin Robinson.
Mr. Speaker, you could be forgiven for believing that the only... When I was Attorney General, I had quite a lot of dealings with the attorneys of the overseas territories in encouraging them to change their transparency rules. And in fact, they showed themselves to be properly responsive to those representations. And you may also agree with me that the overseas territories are entitled to provide financial services and not to be damned for, in fact, trying to ensure the well-being of their own citizens.
No, well, my right honourable friend is absolutely right. What we've tried to do with the overseas territories is say there is a perfectly legitimate business of providing financial services, but they, like us, should be doing it on the basis of high standards, not low standards. I think that is an argument that they now accept and are carrying out, and we should thank them for it. As for the first half of his question, I listened to the right honourable gentleman. I'm not sure I want to read all about it again in a letter, because I don't think there's much to answer.
Mr. Gavin Robinson.
Mr. Speaker, you could be forgiven for believing that the only virtue is transparency. But privacy and equality are both important virtues that we value in this country. Does the Prime Minister agree that, given the many thousands of opinion formers, policy formers and decision makers in this country paid publicly through private service companies, if we are to set any principle, it should be with public finance comes public transparency. Who is paid what by us, the taxpayer? If we can establish that principle first, then we can have a more wide discussion about transparency.
I agree with the first half of his question. There is a value in privacy, and that is why I think we have to have this balance between what is disclosed and what is not disclosed, and I've tried to set out the way forward today. On his issue about private service companies, the Chancellor had something to say about that in the budget, and I think there is a case, particularly where public money is involved, in making sure that people declare these arrangements in the proper way. But I think the changes the Chancellor has spoken about will make sure that whether someone chooses to have a private service company or chooses to be self-employed, the amount of tax they pay will be much more similar.
Sir Edward Garnier.
Thank you, sir. I welcome the Prime Minister's announcement that there will be a new criminal offence applying to corporations who fail to prevent their representatives from criminally facilitating tax evasion. That reflects the failure to prevent bribery offence already existing under the Bribery Act. There are nearly 40 other economic crimes which are listed in the Crime and Courts Act 2013 which are susceptible to deferred prosecution agreements. Will my right honourable friend have discussions with the Ministry of Justice and the law officers to make sure that we can not only add the tax offence that he is referring to, but those other economic crimes, so that they can be dealt with under the failure to prevent system?
Well, my right honourable friend has a lot of expertise in this area, and I think the point he's making is that we have to make sure, as we set out these economic crimes, and the Home Secretary has led the charge to make sure we address this issue properly, we make sure they're properly publicised, properly understood, and then properly prosecuted. And we need to make sure the National Crime Agency and the Serious Fraud Office work together in the way that I know he was keen when he was doing that job.
Reeves.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister says that he is leading on international efforts to crack down on tax evasion. So could the Prime Minister properly explain why he wrote to the then European Council President Herman Van Rompuy in 2013 and asked him to water down the impact of EU transparency rules by treating trusts differently from companies? By treating trusts differently from companies in anti-money laundering rules, despite warnings that such a move could create loopholes for tax dodgers.
With great respect to the honourable lady, I've answered this question several times, most recently to the leader of the Green Party, which is that we were keen to get progress on the beneficial ownership of companies. And if we'd accepted proposals to include trusts, that would have got completely bogged down. It wouldn't have made nearly the progress that we have, where we've got every G7 country and most G20 countries signing up to having action plans on beneficial ownership of companies. If you do that with trusts, my advice was the whole thing would have slowed down to an absolute trickle, and we wouldn't have got all the international cooperation and all the extra money we're going to raise.
Philip Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As far as I'm concerned, it's perfectly clear that neither the Prime Minister nor his father, for that matter, have done anything wrong at all. And in his statement he said, we must defend the right of every British citizen to make money lawfully. That's something which I agree with wholeheartedly. But it is slightly at variance to the description of people who have just done that as morally repugnant. So can the Prime Minister give us a promise that from now on he will uphold the rule of law and the view that the rule of law is what's important in this country, and not question the morality of people who actually act lawfully with regard to their tax arrangements?
I'm very grateful for my honourable friend's support, and I agree what he says about the importance of enabling people to make money within the law, and he's completely right that the rule of law is what matters overall. The simple point I've often made, and will continue to make, is that of course it's tax evasion that is illegal. not tax avoidance. There are many ways that people avoid taxation, not least by putting money into a pension or into an ISA or into other perfectly legitimate ways of planning for their future and their family and all the rest of it. I would, though, say what we've seen sometimes is very, very aggressive measures. I mentioned some of them in my statement. People putting properties in envelopes, in company envelopes rather than paying stamp duty, where it's sometimes difficult for government to catch up quickly enough with the huge changes that are taking place. So I think a bit of leeway on that is necessary, but he's right. It's the rule of law that matters.
Mr. David Winnick.
Prime Minister, realise there's a world of difference between the vast majority of our constituents who pay their tax, pay in the usual way, deducted at source and other means, and taxpayers, very rich taxpayers, who use tax havens for obvious reasons. That's why the accusation is made between them and those people that I've been referring to.
Of course, there is bad practice that takes place, not least in some of these jurisdictions, that needs to be dealt with, and that's what the tax transparency and the sharing of information and registers of beneficial ownership and all the rest are about. But I would say the other thing to recognise that happened last week is that the £11,000 personal allowance came in, so people could earn £11,000 before they pay any income tax at all, and that completed our work of taking 4 million of the lowest paid people in our country out of income tax altogether.
Alok Sharma.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister has paid his taxes, he has behaved perfectly properly, and could I commend him for standing up to those who have sought to besmirch his father's reputation and memory? Could the Prime Minister remind us how much extra money has come into the Exchequer as a result of his government closing down the loopholes that were set up under 13 years of Labour government?
Well, the point is we have raised an extra 12 billion in the last Parliament. We want to raise another 16 billion in this Parliament, stretching out to 2021, the figures that I gave. But also by having a lower rate of corporation tax, we've actually seen more corporation tax come in. Low tax rates, but tax rates that people pay. Those are our watchwords.
Liz Saville Roberts.
We have heard that the rule of law is paramount. The government controls what is legal and what is illegal in tax law. Can the Prime Minister guarantee that the law will make offshore tax dodging in all its forms illegal?
Evading tax is already illegal, whether you are doing it in the UK or somewhere else. The point I've been making is we do need to have this information sharing and the ability to look at information in these jurisdictions in order to see...
Dub reggae, rave, hip-hop en hardcore. Het hardste muziekevent ter wereld komt naar Nederland. 4 podia, 1 arena, 1 winnaar. Red Bull Culture Clash. 26 mei, Ahoy Rotterdam. Koop nu je tickets en make some noise. Check redbullcultureclash.nl.
And the ability to look at information in these jurisdictions in order to see if people have been evading tax. And that is what we're now getting. But we shouldn't use that to say that it's wrong for people, or trade unions, or companies, or pension schemes to invest in unit trusts listed in other countries, because that's a perfectly normal way of investing.
Berry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I congratulate my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, for bringing the transparency to the Office of Prime Minister by publishing his own tax return. Could he say whether he has any thoughts about whether this should be extended to former Prime Ministers, many of whom still receive public money? I personally was very interested in seeing the tax return of one Mr. T. Blair.
No proposals to make in that regard. What I would say is, look, I'm not claiming some perfect record, but on becoming Prime Minister, I cut the Prime Minister's pay by 5% and froze it for the Parliament. I rejected the Prime Minister's tax allowance of £20,000 a year. I reformed the Prime Minister's pension so it's contributory for the first time. As Mr. Speaker knows, Mr. Speaker, the Lord Chancellor and the Prime Minister have all given up the great Office of State pension that gives you half your salary in perpetuity. Well, you say it was done by the Labour government. It wasn't actually brought in until I became Prime Minister. I did it, right? And so all of those steps have been taken, which I think are the right thing to do.
Margaret Ferrier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Is stuff wrong?
Will the Chancellor of the Exchequer be clarifying the tax situation of his family company, Osborne and Little, which he holds shares in, but which has paid no UK corporation tax in 7 years?
Well, what I would say is that the Chancellor's family firm is exactly the sort of manufacturing small firm we want to encourage in our country. For many years, I gather, they haven't been making a profit, but I'm glad that the company is doing well and now paying a dividend. That's something we should welcome. Its tax matters are entirely a matter between the company and the Inland Revenue, and that's the way it should be.
Wendy Morton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to join members on this side of the House in welcoming the Prime Minister's statement this afternoon. And I'd like to ask, when he meets with world leaders in London this May for the first global anti-corruption summit of its kind, will he press them to agree actions to expose corruption wherever it exists?
Well, I think it's good that we're having this summit. Look, as I am writing in a document that will be released before the summit, no country, no politician, no one can claim that they have a perfect and unblemished record in this regard. All countries are battling against these problems, as we did in this House of Commons with the problems of expenses and all the rest of it. But I want to encourage people, and the Prime Minister of Afghanistan is contributing, the President of Nigeria is contributing, and they are admitting that their countries are rife with corruption, but it needs to be dealt with. And the problem is, if nobody actually stands up and talks about these issues and sets out the action plans for delivering these issues, nothing will get done.
Mr. David Lammy.
At the last count, 36,364 properties in London were owned by offshore companies. That's 1 in 10 of one London borough and 7% of another London borough. We should know who owns those properties. Many believe it's dirty money from countries like Russia and the Middle East. Driving up costs, 50% increase since 2007. What is the Prime Minister now going to do about dirty money propping up the London property market?
Well, the first thing that we've already done, and has had a huge impact, is to say that if a property is owned by a company in a so-called envelope structure, so you can't get to the name of the person who owns that property, they have to pay an annual stamp duty charge of something like 15%. And so this has been a massive money raiser to spend on public services and a huge disincentive for this sort of behaviour. But I want to go further. As I said in my speech in Singapore, we need to have more information about who owns what in our country.
In Latham.
Speaker, can I thank the Prime Minister for his very clear statement. This afternoon I've received a very furious email from Martin in my constituency, who said he watched Sky News' Moynihan show yesterday, and he's so shocked that the Shadow Chancellor deliberately misled viewers, and his ignorance, whether deliberate or not, should be exposed in Parliament. And I'm quoting him here: "For a Shadow Chancellor to be so blatantly misleading is not acceptable." And I am quoting here: "The Marxist morons' political motivation are obvious but not an excuse. The Prime Minister could not have paid inheritance tax even if he wished to, as taxes levied on the estate must be paid prior to the grant of property."
Order. Well, I'm extremely grateful to the Honourable Lady, but as the Clerk has just pointed out to me, this is all very well, but it's nothing to do with the responsibility of the Prime Minister. Prime Minister is not... No, order. Order. Don't argue with the Chair. That's not a wise course of action. The Prime Minister is not responsible for what the Shadow Chancellor has said. I do say that to the Honourable Lady kindly, but with some authority in these matters, believe me. Alison McGovern.
Speaker, no one in this House should have to feel family members are being attacked unfairly. And in that, the Prime Minister is absolutely correct. Can I tell him, though, it's not clear to me what he believes about holding shares in offshore trust in tax havens. Does he think it's perfectly okay, in which case, why would his holding them have been a conflict of interest? Or does he think that tax havens are a problem that need fixing, in which case, why did he have them in the first place?
Yes. That's a very good question. Let me answer it in full, because I think it's very important. Do I think it's okay to own shares in a unit trust that's registered in another country, whether that's in Dublin or in Guernsey or elsewhere? Yes, I do. And that is why trade unions hold those shares, companies hold those shares, pension funds, many people in our country hold unit trusts, because here's the key point, is that the unit trust does not exist to make money for itself. It makes money for the unit holders, and if the unit holders live in Britain, they pay British tax, British income tax, British capital gains tax, and all the rest of it. And that's why these arrangements have been in place for many years. No Labour government, no Labour policy review, no Conservative policy review has ever thought of getting rid of them. It's important they're administered and run in the proper way. But that's my answer to her first question.
De praktijk leert ons. Dat is een mooie Nederlandse uitdrukking. Dat je kunt leren van de praktijk.
Mijn naam is Floris de Vries, docent bij...
It's important they're administered and run in the proper way, but that's my answer to her first question. A second question is, why, if I thought there was nothing wrong with a holding like that, did I sell my shares because there might be a conflict of interest? I sold shares in every company that I owned because I thought there were two options. You can either put things into a blind trust, as ministers in Labour or Conservative governments have done. Nothing wrong with that. Very good way to go about it. But I thought maybe even simpler and more straightforward was just sell everything, so that, because then I would not own any shares. So if any of the companies that I'd previously had a shareholding in any way had dealings with the government, there was no way that even if someone could look inside a blind trust, they could find any conflict of interest. That's why I sold the shares. I happen to think it was quite a sensible thing to do.
Oliver Dowden.
Will the Prime Minister confirm that the only irregular thing about the summary of his tax return is the fact that he voluntarily and privately forsook the £20,000 Prime Ministerial tax-free allowance, something that was enjoyed by many of his predecessors, including those opposite? Instead, he rightly focused on increasing the personal allowance so that millions of low-income earners could avoid paying tax altogether, and when he pledged to continue that policy.
Well, I'm very grateful to give my honourable friend that reassurance. We have the target in our manifesto of a £12,500 personal tax allowance, and we want to meet that. And I think what I did as Prime Minister was the right thing, not least because, as it says in the information for my tax return, there is support for me and my wife from the Conservative Party in terms of some of the costs and issues of travel and other things that you have to deal with as the leader of a party. And I thought that was a better way of doing it. Party money, not taxpayers' money, but party money on which I pay a tax charge.
John Mann.
Is it the right thing to do to be claiming expenses to live in a grace and favour apartment and at the same time to be making a big profit out of your own main home?
Well, I'm rather baffled by the Honourable Gentleman. I'm a little bit baffled by the Honourable Gentleman because he announced over the weekend he was going to refer me to the Parliamentary Commissioner for Standards, so I pitched up there, one of my office pitched up there this morning with all the information necessary, only to hear that he hasn't actually yet made a complaint. So I hope he's going to find the time later on and do what he said he was going to do. Look, the point, I think he's misunderstood. I am very lucky to live in number 10 Downing Street, actually precisely number 11 and 12 Downing Street, and as a result of that, I receive a benefit in kind, and because of that benefit in kind, calculated at I think some £7,000, I pay a tax on that benefit on kind for living in the house. So it's not a subsidy I'm getting, it's a benefit which I'm very grateful for, and I give the taxman money in respect of it.
Mr. Michael Fabricant.
But may I tell the Prime Minister that he should not be ashamed that he has the good fortune to be born into a well-off family. He has nothing to be ashamed about. May I tell the Prime Minister it's not a sin for his parents, quite naturally, to want their savings to be cascaded down through the generations. He has nothing to be ashamed of. But can I warn my right honourable friend, no matter how much information he wants to divulge, nothing will satisfy some of those people on the Labour front bench.
I'm very grateful for what my honourable friend says. I think there is a point at which you have to say, I've published the information that I think is relevant. I've gone back over the last 6 years, but that's the limit of what I'm going to release. Some people say, well, what about your wife's tax return, or what about your mother's financial affairs, or all the rest of it? I really think there comes a time when we should say we have a register of members' interests. Prime Ministers and Chancellors and opposition leaders and shadow Chancellors have done more than that, and we should rely on the register of members' interests to police the rest of our affairs.
Streeting. Given that more than half of the companies implicated in the Panama leaks are registered in UK overseas territories and Crown dependencies, does the Prime Minister regret telling this House in 2013, I do not think it's fair any longer to refer to any of the overseas territories or Crown dependencies as tax havens? And could he try and rebuild some of the public trust that he's lost in the last week by making sure that, particularly in terms of publishing information about beneficial ownership, that Crown dependencies and overseas territories do follow the UK's example, and will he take concrete action by putting this at the centre of the agenda of his own anti-corruption summit next month?
Well, the reason I made that statement in 2013 is we'd got the Crown dependencies and the overseas territories for the first time to share automatically tax information with the United Kingdom government. That is something that didn't happen under the last Labour government, something that we did achieve. It was a different approach, but now he's right, we want to go further, and the announcement today is not only will they share that information and have the common reporting standard, but they're going to give us access to their information about beneficial ownership. Just so he knows how different things were under the last government, the then Financial Secretary of the Treasury, in response to questions about the overseas territories, said this: the negotiation of tax information exchange agreements with other jurisdictions, including the UK, is essentially a matter for the Crown dependencies themselves. I.e., he was saying, nothing to do with me, Gov, it's up to them. Well, that is the government that we replaced, and we took a different approach, and we've made a lot of progress.
Mr. Richard Drax.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Forgive my lack of voice. Carol says I totally understand the Prime Minister's predicament and his instinct to protect his father, and I would have done exactly the same. And his father did nothing wrong whatsoever. The Prime Minister mentioned a long and thoughtful debate will come. Can I say most gently that when public figures get into trouble, that in future there are no more knee-jerk reactions, and that a long and thoughtful debate is given to avoid unnecessary consequences for everybody else?
No, I think my honourable friend, first of all, thank you for his support, but he makes an important point, which we should try to make decisions about these things calmly and rationally after debate. I felt, after all the questions I was being asked, the right thing to do was to publish this information, but I couldn't have been clearer today that I don't want to see that as some precedent that every member of this House, or indeed every member of my Cabinet, has to follow. I think we should think very carefully. We've always had a system in this country based on full disclosure to the revenue, but taxpayer confidentiality. Now, some other countries do have complete publication of all tax returns and all tax information. That hasn't been our way. We've had a different system, and I don't think we should give it up lightly.
Caroline Flint.
A different system, and I don't think we should give it up lightly.
Caroline Flint.
Speaker, it saddens me that the MP for Rutland and Melton seems to suggest that if you weren't a millionaire, you were a low achiever. Speaking as a low achiever, the biggest multinational company earns more income in a single week than the combined incomes of all MPs put together. Now, the Prime Minister has spoken about transparency before and today, and that is why many of us across this House, from all parties, want to make sure that the country-by-country information that multinationals will be obliged to provide to HMRC should be put in the public domain. Will he or a minister meet with myself and other members of the Public Accounts Committee to discuss this proposal?
Thank
I've always thought of the Honourable Lady as a high achiever. She certainly put the boot into my predecessor more effectively than I ever did. I remember that very well. The point about the point about the country-to-country reporting is what we're trying to achieve, as I said in my statement, is a common reporting standard so that companies report to tax authorities in the same way, and then the sharing of that information so you can see if company A is paying X amount of tax in one jurisdiction and Y amount in the other, and that's not right, then you can do something about it. Now, I think that at the moment is the most powerful way of achieving what we want to achieve. There are those who say we need to go even further in public declarations of tax. I think it's a very interesting argument, but let's not make the best the enemy of the good. We've got a very solid way now of making sure these companies pay tax properly, and I want to see that completed.
Mr. David Nuttall.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does my right honourable friend agree that any course of action designed to reduce tax which does not constitute tax evasion must by definition be legal, even if some may regard it as aggressive tax avoidance, and it is up to this Parliament to legislate to make such courses of action illegal?
My honourable friend is absolutely right. Where there is aggressive avoidance taking place that is clearly against the spirit of the law, then Parliament should act. And as I've said many times, that's what the Chancellor has done, that's what HMRC advises us about. I think sometimes there are occasions when the tax avoidance is so aggressive that it is right to warn those taking part in it that legislation will follow, and so therefore they shouldn't take part in the scheme in the first place, and that often happens too.
You Blair Donaldson.
Sir has described the tax arrangements being discussed today as standard practice and normal. Assuming we are still all in this together, will he be issuing guidance, perhaps in the form of a leaflet to every UK household, so ordinary taxpayers can find out how they too can benefit from offshore tax havens?
Well, the point is that there are many people in our country, I think there are over now 12.5 million shareholders, many of whom hold shares in things like unit trusts. There's plenty of information about them, they don't need any from me, but the point is if you invest in one of those, if you're a UK resident, you must pay UK income tax and UK capital gains tax just as you're buying a share in any other organisation.
Mr. Robert Jenrick.
Speaker, I wouldn't recommend doing this, but reading back through Hansard over the last 13 years of the Labour government, I couldn't find a single occasion on which the member for Islington North raised any of these issues. The closest he came, Mr. Speaker, was when he described the Labour government's decision to use orders in council to take control of the Turks and Caicos Islands as medieval and extremely undemocratic, a policy he now advocates for all territories. Isn't it fortunate that we had a government after 2010 who actually took up this agenda?
I'm interested to see the right honourable gentleman conducted a U-turn, because recently he's been suggesting taking control of these territories. I can now see a use for the nuclear submarines as they head off towards the Isle of Man, as the Corbyn invasion force begins to mass to take over this territory. Much more sensible to get them to do the things they ought to be doing.
Ms. Kendall.
Why does the Prime Minister think so many companies are registered in Panama in the first place? Why not London or New York?
The reason why a lot of unit trusts register in different countries, and a number of them have been named right now, many of them are registering in Dublin, is that they want to be able to market their services not simply to UK residents who pay UK taxes, but to other people. And that is why actually, if you look at the Inland Revenue, the way they arrange this, they actually want to make sure that UK fund managers can be involved and pay their taxes here in the UK, and we can build the investment industry that this country can rightly be proud of.
Mr. Andrew Bridgen.
Speaker, can I thank my right honourable friend for his open and frank statement today? And I think that any reasonably minded person, he's completely exonerated himself. Can he confirm that under HMRC rules all the supporting documentation for a tax return should be retained for 7 years, and since the Leader of Opposition was late supplying his tax return, should he be fined?
There's obviously no fine for the fact that he didn't come to the House having already published it, although it was disappointing that we got it at 3:35, I think, when I was on my feet. But obviously matters for fines of late production of tax returns, I think that's a matter for the HMRC.
Paul Flynn. 2013, his colleague Lord Brain-Caffra was found guilty of an egregious breach of the Commons rules and the House of Lords rules for misleading a committee of inquiry in 2011 and for taking £10,000 a month as a payment for lobbying for the Cayman Islands. He had no punishment from his party and was allowed to get away with it with a brief apology to the House of Lords. Will the Prime Minister tell us that if in future any parliamentarian in his party uses his privileged position and prostitutes it in order to make private gain, he will act and discipline them?
Well, I think the point is we have now rules in this House for the declaration of members' interests. We have a policeman, as it were, in terms of making sure they're properly carried out. And then we do have punishments, including expulsion, for misdeclarations and misbehaviour. I'm not as familiar with the situation in the House of Lords, but I think they've been moving in the same direction, and that's all to the good.
Ben Howlett.
Speaker, whilst the...
Elk bedrijf heeft een image nodig. Een image dat je een grootse entree laat maken. Want je wilt toch niet deze schilder zijn? Nee, je wilt deze schilder zijn. Een schilder met professioneel drukwerk, waar hij trots op kan zijn. Drukwerk waarmee de schilder overal gezien wordt. Bestel ook je drukwerk op drukwerkdeal.nl. Drukwerkdeal. Laat zien wie je bent.
Ben Howlett.
Speaker, whilst the conversations around Panama are interesting, no doubt, to the front bench of the opposition, reality check here. Most of my constituents who are struggling to get on the property ladder actually benefit from inheritance tax. Benefit from inheritance as a result of a lot of the change that happened under the previous Parliament. Does my honourable friend agree with me that the time is now to further reform inheritance tax to help more people, mainly my age, get on the property ladder?
Well, I think there is a role for making sure that people can pass on the family home exempt from inheritance tax, and that's why we've set out the steps during this Parliament to make sure that can happen. That completes what was set out in our manifesto.
Live effort.
I think the public would be more inclined to take the Prime Minister at his word when he wants to clamp down on tax avoidance. Had his government not appointed Edward Troop as Executive Chair of Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs in 2012? Now, this is someone who said taxation is legalised extortion and is valid only to the extent of the law. Can the Prime Minister say what source of money he got to pay Mr. Troop? And does someone with those views belong in the HMRC?
Edward Troop is a dedicated public servant who works for the Inland Revenue, does a very good job. As I think the report in the papers point out this morning, he had a commercial career at Simmons & Simmons, one of the most respected city legal practices that there is. And frankly, it's a good thing if we can attract people from private practice into the Revenue and Customs to make sure we collect all the money we should.
Mark Spencer.
Mr. Speaker, can the Prime Minister assure the House that in future any changes to taxation will do nothing to diminish the aspiration of working families, so that those families who want to do the right thing, provide for their future, save for their retirement and pass something on to their children, can continue to do that?
I think my honourable friend is absolutely right. If you look at our reforms to inheritance tax, if you look at our reforms to pensions, we're enabling people to take and spend more of their own money as they choose. They're also able to pass it on to their children and to help with those key purchases, the first home, the first car, helping young people with their families. All of that, wealth cascading down the generations and helping people to do that is absolutely part of our goal.
On break.
Of course, the Prime Minister's announcement that people will be criminalised if they assist with tax evasion, particularly as it was announced by the then Chief Secretary to the Treasury, Liberal Democrat Danny Alexander. Will the Prime Minister revisit other Liberal Democrat proposals put forward in coalition to see if they can also play a significant role in dealing with the really difficult issue of tax evasion?
No, it's certainly true that the coalition government achieved a lot in this area. It was led by myself and the Second Lord of the Treasury in terms of driving this agenda, but particularly at the G8 and the G20, but at the time we did have the full support of our coalition partners.
Helen Whately.
Mr. Speaker, I welcome my right honourable friend's statement today, and I listened carefully to the words of the Leader of the Opposition. But does the Prime Minister share my concern that the Leader of the Opposition seemed to forget, or possibly was he unaware, that aspiration, that determination and the prospect of eventual financial reward are ingredients of the strong economy that we have, which lead to jobs and incomes for many? And does my right honourable friend agree that we should condemn these politics of envy, and will he stick to the politics of opportunity and aspiration?
My honourable friend is absolutely right. What we want is an aspiration, an enterprise society where we set low tax rates, we encourage people to make the best of themselves and for their families, and that will actually build not just a stronger economy, but in my view, a stronger society too.
Gapes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister referred to his anti-corruption summit. Can he tell us which countries are going to be represented there, and will an invitation be extended to either President Putin or some of his corrupt cronies and those who fund the RT propaganda channel to explain the $2 billion held in Panama by that corrupt regime?
The honourable gentleman has been restored to rude health. I welcomed him earlier, and I know the Prime Minister will welcome him. The Prime Minister.
Very glad to see him back in his familiar place. I think it's fair to say the guest list is still being worked on for the corruption summit. But the point is this: we will be asking people on the basis not that they run perfect countries or perfect governments, but that are they going to commit to public declarations of things like open beneficial ownership registration, sharing tax information, making sure that when assets are looted that we can confiscate them and restore them to the people who they belong to. If countries want to sign up to that, however much their record in the past may have been imperfect, we'll be encouraging them to come and do just that.
Mark Menzies.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My mother spent 32 years working in an ICI factory. But like the Prime Minister's mother, she's 81. Like the Prime Minister's mother, she's lost her husband. Like the Prime Minister's mother, she wants to hand some of that money down to the next generation. So can I say how deeply hurtful those remarks must have been to the Prime Minister over the last few days? And what, Mr. Speaker, what I would urge is the Prime Minister can tell the House what message we want to send to the millions of people in all of our constituencies who want to do the right thing by the next generation.
Well, I'm very grateful for my honourable friend's remarks, and I'm sure my mother will be too. She said, like me, she's developing a thicker skin with every week that goes past. But he's absolutely right. Many people want to pass wealth and assets and help their children and help them in all the ways they can, and that's not something we should be ashamed of. It's something we should actively encourage. It's something that can help to build the strong society that we want to see in our country.
McKinnell.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister acknowledged in his statement that under current legislation it is difficult to prosecute companies that assist with tax evasion. I and many others, including the Right Honourable Member for Harborough, would add fraud and corruption to that list too. The government made a promise in its manifesto to extend the new corporate offence to deal with all economic crime, not just tax evasion. So would the Prime Minister commit today to urgently review the current position to only extend that offence to tax evasion, but an offence that will incorporate fraud and corruption too?
Well, the Honourable Lady is making a very interesting suggestion, and I'll look at it carefully. We've announced this proposal. We've identified...
Nieuwe Series 9. Het eerste scheerapparaat van Braun met 4 gespecialiseerde scheerelementen. Voor 's werelds meest efficiënte en comfortabele scheerbeurt. De Synchrosonic-technologie zorgt voor 40.000 scheerbewegingen per minuut om verschillende soorten haartjes af te scheren. Nieuwe Series 9. Alleen van Braun.
And I'll look at it carefully. We've announced this proposal. We've identified that there will be an opportunity in the gracious speech to include this in a future bill. And we can look at that time about whether there is, I think what she's arguing for is an extension and tidying up of the offences so that they can be used in the same way. And I'll look very carefully at what she suggests.
Order.
I'm sorry to disappoint Romanian colleagues, but we've had a very full exchange and we must now move on to the second statement. Statement, the Secretary of State for Business, Innovation and Skills, Secretary Sajid Javid.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With permission, I would like to make a statement on Britain's steel industry. All of us are now familiar with the perfect storm of factors that has led to the global price of steel collapsing during 2015. But for all the economic challenges we face, the real tragedy is a human one. Over the past 11 months, I visited steelmaking communities right across the UK. They're very different plants in very different places. But there's one thing, Mr. Speaker, that unites them. That's the pride and the dedication of the highly skilled people that I meet. All they want is to be able to carry on doing what they do so well. And I'm doing everything I can to help them do just that. Mr. Speaker, I'll talk first about Port Talbot. Now, since becoming Secretary of State for Business, I've been in frequent contact with the senior management of Tata. This includes several meetings with the group's chairman last year and this. Several weeks ago, Tata told me, in confidence, that they were seriously considering an immediate closure of Port Talbot. Not a sale, a closure. That would have meant thousands of hard-working men and women could already be out of a job. Thousands more would have been facing a very bleak future. I was not prepared to let that happen. In the days that followed, I worked relentlessly to convince Tata...
Order! The statement must be heard. The record shows that the Chair always facilitates a very full and thorough interrogation, and the Minister, Secretary of State, would expect nothing less, but the Secretary of State is entitled to the courtesy of being heard. The Secretary of State.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In the days that followed, I worked relentlessly to convince Tata that it was in everyone's interest to keep the plant open.
Please have a seat. Good afternoon, everybody. This month marks a notable anniversary, 200 years since the Battle of New Orleans. Here in America, we call the great victory over a mighty United Kingdom. Our British friends call it a technicality. The treaty ending the war was signed weeks before. Either way, we've long since made up. On this 200th anniversary of a great American victory, we count the United Kingdom as one of our greatest friends and strongest allies.
Zet hem op pauze. Zet hem op pauze. Ja, lekker. Wat zei je? Kijk, zit er gewoon. Kom naar buiten. Kom naar buiten. Misschien volgen ze ons.
Which countries are going to be represented there, and will an invitation be extended to either President Putin or some...
Arguing for is
Thousands more would have been facing a very bleak future. I was not prepared to let that happen. In the days that followed, I worked relentlessly.
Candidacy. After all, who could possibly believe, the media said, that millions of people are prepared to make a political revolution? When we began this campaign, we were 70 points behind in the national polls to Secretary Clinton. 70 points. In the last 2 weeks, 2 out of 3 national polls had us ahead. we have won 8 out of 9 caucuses and primaries. In general election matchups, in the last poll done by CNN, we were beating Donald Trump by 20 points. And in almost every instance, our margin against Trump is wider than Secretary Clinton's. And if there is a large voter turnout a week from today here in New York State, we're going to win here as well. Let me just speak for a moment about 2 incidents yesterday that occurred that really tell us where we are as a nation. You heard a few moments ago from Larry Cohn. Larry is the former president of the Communication Workers of America, one of our great unions. And I was in Buffalo yesterday talking to employees of Verizon who are going out on strike. And that is a very difficult decision. Nobody goes out on strike without a lot of thought, because there's a lot of pain going on in families when you don't have any income coming in. But they're going out on strike because they refuse to be beaten down by a greedy corporation who could care less about them or the people of this country. All they want is more and more profit, and it doesn't matter what happens to their employees or people in America. This is what they want to do. They want to cut benefits for their employees. They want to throw American workers out on the street and move their calling centers to low-wage countries around the world. They are not investing in inner cities in America where people today do not have quality broadband. And they got their lawyers and tax accountants working overtime so that in a given year, despite making billions of dollars in profit, they pay nothing, not a nickel, in federal taxes. That's story number one. But what Verizon is doing is not anything new. That is what major corporation after major corporation has done in the last number of decades. I was recently attacked by Jeffrey Immelt, the head of General Electric. And I say to Mr. Immelt, if you continue to downsize in America, to outsource our jobs to low-wage countries around the world, if you continue to do your best to avoid paying taxes in the United States of America, you will have to contend with me if I'm elected president of the United States. Corporation after major corporation has shown its contempt for its employees and, in fact, for the people of our country. What they have said is, fine, you work for me for 30 years, it doesn't matter, we're shutting down, we're moving to Mexico, we're moving to China. And we're going to do our best to avoid paying any taxes in this country. There has got to be a change in the culture of corporate America. They're going to have to pay attention to the needs of the people in this country. And not just their bottom line. That's story number one. Verizon, General Electric. But let me give you another story. Just yesterday, it was reported that Goldman Sachs, one of the major financial institutions in this country, reached an agreement with the federal government to pay a settlement of $5 billion. Now they reached that settlement because they were selling worthless packages of subprime mortgage loans. They were lying about what was in those packages. And what they did, and what other financial institutions also did, they were not alone, was to create a situation 8 or so years ago which resulted in the collapse of Wall Street, which sent this country into the worst economic downturn since the Great Depression. And all of you know what the results of that were. Millions of Americans lost their jobs, they lost their homes, and in some cases they lost their life savings because of the greed and recklessness and illegal behavior on Wall Street. So what you have now, you have a corporate culture which says we don't have to worry about the people who built our companies. We don't have to worry about the consumers that created the wealth for our companies. We don't have to worry about anything except our bottom line. If we can make $5 more by shutting down in Rochester or Buffalo or any place else and move to China, that's all we have to worry about. And I say to that corporate culture, those days are over. They are not going to destroy the middle class of this country just to see billionaires make even more money. Those days are over. Let me take a moment to talk about some of the very significant differences that exist between Secretary Clinton and myself. And those differences are profound. You can tell a great deal about what candidates will do based on how they raise their campaign funds. Sad, but truthfully, it now takes an enormous amount of money, hundreds of millions of dollars, to run for President of the United States. And we had to make a decision early on in our campaign as to whether or not we would do what every other campaign has done, and that is establish a super PAC. Well, after about 1/10 of 1 second of thought, we agreed with you. Our campaign does not represent the billionaire class. We do not represent corporate America. We do not represent Wall Street. We do not want their money. Instead, we did something that was revolutionary. We went to the American people, to working families, and we said, if you want a candidate who is going to stand with you and take on the big money interest, help us out. And then what happened was literally unbelievable. In the last 11 months, we have received over 6 million individual campaign contributions. That is more individual campaign contributions than any candidate in the history of our country up until this point. Anybody here know what the average contribution is? That's right, $27. What that means is we have shown the world that you can run a winning national campaign without being dependent on Wall Street and the big money interests. And that, in the context of contemporary American politics, is revolutionary. Now, Hillary Clinton has chosen a different path. And the path that she has chosen is to establish a number of super PACs that are out raising large sums of money from powerful special interests. During the last filing period, our largest super PAC reported raising $25 million from special interests, including $15 million from Wall Street. Does anybody seriously believe that you can be an agent of change if you are taking money from the most powerful special interest in this country? Our job is to stand up to these powerful special interests, not to take their money. But it is not just her super PAC. Secretary Clinton, as you may know, has given a number of speeches on Wall Street, including speeches to Goldman Sachs, in which she received $250,000 a speech. Now, what I have said is if you're going to receive $250,000 a speech, it must be an incredibly brilliant speech. It must be an extraordinarily insightful speech. It must be a speech written in Shakespearean prose. It must be a speech enlightening all people. And that is why I believe Secretary Clinton should release the transcripts of those speeches. It would do the world a great deal of good if the brilliance in those speeches could be shared with all of us. But it is not just how we raise money for our campaigns which distinguish us. It is also another issue which is not a sexy issue, but it is an issue of enormous consequence. Media doesn't talk about it at all, but millions of people have suffered the consequence of disastrous trade policies. I was elected in my state of Vermont to the Congress in 1990, and when I took office, it occurred to me very quickly that NAFTA and other ensuing trade agreements were written by corporate America with the sole purpose of allowing large corporations to shut down here, move to low-wage countries abroad, and then bring their products back into America. That's what I feared, and I was out on the picket lines in opposition to NAFTA. And what I feared is exactly what has happened over the last number of decades. Here in New York State, in my state of Vermont, all over this country, what corporations have done is shut down factories, thrown millions of workers out on the street as they move to Mexico, China, and other low-wage countries. I opposed every one of these disastrous trade agreements. Secretary Clinton supported virtually every one of these disastrous trade agreements. If elected president, we are going to have new trade policies in this country. If corporate America wants us to buy their products, they damn well better start investing in America, not in China. All of you know that one of the very, very important parts of a president's job is foreign policy. The most important debate over foreign policy in the modern history of this country took place in the year 2002, and that debate was over Iraq. I listened very, very closely to what President Bush and Dick Cheney and Don Rumsfeld and all these guys had to say. I listened closely, and I concluded that they were not telling the truth. Not only did I vote against that war, I helped lead the opposition to going to war in Iraq. Gives me no pleasure to tell you this, but if you go to my website, look at what I said when I was on the floor of the House in 2002 in terms of my fears about what would happen if we went into Iraq. And sadly, much of what I feared would happen did happen. Secretary Clinton was then a United States Senator from your state, from New York State. She listened to the same arguments from Bush and Cheney. Her judgment was faulty. She voted for that disastrous war. She has since, I believe, recognized that that vote was a mistake. But what we need is leadership that has the courage to stand up when we need them to stand up. One of the looming crises facing our country and in fact the world is whether or not we're going to have enough clean drinking water. This is a problem that has surfaced in New York State, in Vermont, and all over this country. I believe, and I'm very proud that Vermont has led the nation in banning fracking. And if elected president, we will tell the fossil fuel industry that their short-term profits are not more important than preventing people from drinking toxic water. People have a right to know that the water they're drinking is clean. We will fight for a national ban on fracking. Secretary Clinton's views are different. When she was Secretary of State, in fact, she actively pushed fracking technologies in countries all over the world. And she still has refused to come down firmly in favor of a national ban on fracking. Now, this campaign is doing as well as it is because we're doing something very radical. We are telling the American people the truth. The truth is not always pleasant, and it's not pleasant in our personal lives when we have difficulties. It is not happy news politically in the national sense as well. But the bottom line is, if you do not go forward personally, we do not go forward as a nation unless we are prepared to deal with the hard truths that face us. And here are some hard truths that as a nation we must deal with. Truth number one, we have a corrupt campaign finance system that is undermining American democracy. American democracy is not a complicated concept. It is one person, one vote. It is not billionaires buying elections, and together we are going to overturn this disastrous Citizens United Supreme Court decision. When you have a handful of billionaires like the Koch brothers and a few of their friends prepared to spend some $900 million in this campaign cycle, friends, that is not democracy, that is oligarchy. We will not allow that. But it is not just a corrupt campaign finance system. We are also going to address and reverse a rigged economy. A rigged economy is an economy in which today the top 1/10 of 1% now own almost as much wealth as the bottom 90%. A rigged economy is an economy in which the 20 wealthiest people, 20 people, own more wealth than the bottom half of America, 150 million people. Let me tell you in addition what a rigged economy is about. It is an economy in which one family, the Walton family that owns Walmart, owns more wealth than the bottom 40% of the American people, one family. But to add insult to injury, Walmart, owned by the Waltons, pays wages so low that many of its employees are forced to go on food stamps or Medicaid. And who is paying higher taxes to provide those food stamps and Medicaid? That's right, the middle classes. So you have this insane situation where the middle class is subsidizing the wealthiest family in America. That's crazy. And I say to the Walton family, get off of welfare, pay your workers a living wage. This campaign is asking people to think outside of the box, to think outside of the status quo, not to accept what the corporate media tells you as reality. You know what reality is, not CNN or CBS or ABC. And here is reality. Here is economic reality. For the last 30, 40 years, the middle class of this country has been shrinking. Here is economic reality that despite a huge increase in technology and worker productivity, millions of our people are working longer hours for lower wages. Here is reality. Today we have families by the millions where mom is out working, dad is out working, the kids are out working, and yet 58% of all new income generated goes to the top 1%. Here is economic reality. In America today, our people work the longest hours of any people in a major country. Japanese are very hard workers. We work now longer hours than do the people in Japan. And what that means, and I see this with my own eyes as I go around this country, people are exhausted. They are tired of working 50 or 60 hours a week. They are tired of not being able to spend enough time with their children. You know, it is a funny thing. When you stop and think about it, again, think outside of the box. Don't accept the options or the worldview given to you by the media. Think about this one for a second. 100 years ago, workers all over this country engaged in demonstrations, and they had these large signs in front of them. And what they said is, we are not beasts of burden. We want a 40-hour work week. That is what they said 100 years ago. And you know what? Today, most workers in America still don't have a 40-hour work week. Something is wrong. An explosion of technology and worker productivity, a global economy, and yet the middle class continues to decline, and almost all new income and wealth goes to the top 1%. Let me be very clear. If elected President of the United States, we are going to create an economy that works for all of us, not just the 1%. Goldman Sachs may not like it, Verizon may not like it, General Electric may not like it, but we will create an economy that works for all of us, not just the people on top. But it is not just a corrupt campaign finance system that we have to address. It is not just a rigged economy. It is also a broken criminal justice system. This is America. This is the year 2016. We should not, we must not have more people in jail in this country than any other country on earth. Again, think about it. Think outside of the box. China, country 4 times our size, a communist, authoritarian country which does not tolerate dissent particularly well. We have more people in jail in this country than does China. This is an issue that we must and we will address. Now, how do we end up where we are? Well, for a start, again, not an issue that is talked about a whole lot, we will talk about it, is that youth unemployment, kids 17 to 20 who graduated high school, if those kids are white, their real unemployment rate, 33%. Latino, 36%. African American kids, 51%. Here is a not so radical idea. We're going to invest in our young people in terms of jobs and education. Not jails and incarceration. It costs less money to send the kid to college than to lock him up. Let's move in that direction. We have also got to take a very hard look at the need for police department reform. All of us are tired of seeing videos on television where unarmed people, often African American, are shot and killed. I was a mayor in Burlington, Vermont for 8 years. I have worked with police officers all over my state and all over this country. Vast majority of police officers are honest, hardworking, doing a very difficult job. But like any other public official, when a police officer breaks the law, that officer must be held accountable. Police culture must change. Lethal force should be the last response, not the first response. We need to demilitarize local police departments. We need to make police departments reflect the diversity of the communities in which they serve. We need to end the private ownership of prisons and detention centers. We need to rethink the so-called war on drugs. Over the last 30 years, millions of Americans have received criminal records for possession of marijuana. Many lives have been destroyed as a result because you got a criminal record. You go out to get a job, it may be hard to get that job. Furthermore, this becomes a racial issue because while whites and blacks do marijuana at about equal levels, blacks are 4 times more likely to be arrested. Today, Under the Federal Controlled Substance Act, marijuana is listed as a Schedule I drug, right alongside of heroin. Now, people can argue the pluses and minuses of marijuana, but everybody knows marijuana is not a killer drug like heroin. And that is why I have introduced legislation to take marijuana out of the Federal Controlled Substance Act. But when we talk about drugs, all of you know that this country today is facing a tragic crisis. All over America, people are becoming addicted to opiates and to heroin, and every day people are dying from overdosing. In my view, if we are going to be effective in addressing this crisis, we need to make substance abuse and addiction a health issue, not a criminal issue. This campaign is a winning campaign because we are listening to the American people and not just wealthy campaign contributors. We are listening to workers who tell me they can't make it on $8 or $9 an hour, which is why we are going to raise the national minimum wage to $15 an hour. This campaign is listening to seniors, disabled vets, and the disability community. Now, unbelievably, at a time when millions of seniors and disabled vets and people with disabilities, at a time when many of them are trying to survive on $11,000, $12,000 a year Social Security, Republicans actually want to cut Social Security benefits. Well, I've got some bad news for them. We are not going to cut Social Security benefits. We're going to expand Social Security benefits. This campaign is listening to women. And what women are telling me is they are sick and tired of going to work and finding out they're making 79 cents on the dollar compared to men. They want the whole damn dollar, and they're right. And I know that every man here in this arena is going to stand with the women in the fight for pay equity. This campaign is listening to young people. And they are telling me, how does it happen that when they do the right thing, when they go out and get the best education that they can, they are ending up $30,000, $50,000, $70,000 a day. We We should be rewarding people for getting an education, not punishing them. Here's the truth. 50 years ago, you had a high school degree, you were doing pretty well. And the likelihood is you can go out into the community and get a decent job at decent wages. That was 50 years ago. Well, the world, the economy, and technology have changed. Today, the simple truth is that people need more education. And that is why I believe that when we look at the concept of public education today, it is not good enough to just look at first grade through 12th grade. We need to make public education mean that public colleges and universities will be tuition free. Some of my opponents think, oh, this is a very radical idea. It is not a radical idea. It is an idea that already exists in Germany and Scandinavia and other countries around the world. They know that they will create a strong economy in the future when they have a well-educated workforce. Furthermore, when we talk about higher education, we have got to end this absurd situation where millions of Americans today are being crushed by outrageously high levels of student debt. Anybody here with student debt? Unbelievable, it really is. It really is unbelievable when you think about it. And I have gone all over this country and I've talked to people. Young woman graduated dental school in Iowa. We need dentists. She left school $400,000 in debt. This is at a time when we need more dentists. Spoke to a woman in Burlington, Vermont. Her dream was to go to medical school, practice primary health care. That's what she's doing. $300,000 in debt. Talk to a guy in Nevada, 55 years of age. He's been paying off his student debt for the last 25 years. He's more in debt today than he was when he took the loan out. Talk to a kid in Iowa, 2 years of college, dropped out, $60,000 in debt. We have got to take a deep breath, think outside of the box. It is insane. It is insane that people have got to pay off their debt for decades, can't afford to buy a car, get a house, get married, have kids, because they are paying off that student debt. That is why I believe we've got to change the law, allow people with student debt to refinance their loans with the lowest interest rates they can find. Now my opponents say, well, Bernie, you know, you're like Santa Claus, you're giving out all this free stuff. You're making public colleges and universities tuition free, you're going to lower substantially student debts. How are you going to pay for that? I will tell you, and I want you to think about this, and this means, again, thinking outside of the box. When Wall Street's greed and illegal behavior destroyed our economy, they went begging the Congress for a bailout. And against my vote, they got that bailout. I believe that it is totally appropriate today for us to impose a tax on Wall Street speculation. Which will bring in more than enough money to make public colleges and universities tuition free and lower student debt. Now, I understand that Wall Street and Goldman Sachs and these guys may not like it. Tough luck. Employment rate is somewhere around 50%, where the school system is failing. And what the African American community is asking, and justly so, how does it happen that we have trillions of dollars to spend on a war in Iraq we never should have gotten into? How can we give tax breaks to billionaires, but supposedly we don't have the funds to rebuild our inner cities? If elected president, our national priorities will change. We will invest in rebuilding inner cities. This campaign is listening to the Latino community. There are 11 million undocumented people in this country. Many of them are being exploited because they have no legal protection. Many of them are living in fear and in the shadows. I agree with the Latino community that now is the time to move forward toward comprehensive immigration reform and a path toward citizenship. And if Congress does not do its job and pass that kind of legislation, I will use the executive powers of the presidency to do all that I can. This campaign is listening to a group of people whose voices are very rarely heard, and that is the Native American community. Anybody who has studied the history of our country, going back before we became a country, understands that the Native American people were lied to, were cheated, and that many of the treaties they negotiated were broken. And yet we owe the Native American people a debt of gratitude that can never be repaid. They have provided us with some of the best parts of our culture. They have taught us, among many other things, that as human beings we are part of nature. And that the human species will not survive if we continue to destroy nature. A Sanders administration will change the nature of our relationship with the Native American people. I am a member of the U.S. Senate Committee on the Environment. I have talked to scientists all over our country and all over the world. Bottom line is, climate change is real. It is caused by human activity. and it is already causing disastrous harm in our country and around the world. And what the scientists are also telling us is if we do not act boldly within the next several years, the horrific situation of today will only become much worse, that we're looking at a process by which at the end of this century, not such a long time, planet Earth will be between 5 to 10 degrees Fahrenheit warmer. And that means more drought, more floods, more extreme weather disturbances, more acidification of the ocean, more rising sea levels, and more international conflict as people fight over limited natural resources. As human beings and as custodians of this planet, we have the moral responsibility to leave this planet in a way that is healthy and habitable for future generations. Together, we will take on the fossil fuel industry. We will transform our energy system. We will transform our energy system away from fossil fuel to energy efficiency and sustainable energies. I have been criticized for saying this in the past, so let me say it again. I believe that health care is a right of all people. I believe that healthcare is a right, not a privilege. I believe that there is something profoundly wrong when the United States today is the only major country on earth that does not guarantee healthcare to all people. Today, despite the gains, and there were many, of the Affordable Care Act, and I'm on the committee that helped write that bill, 29 million Americans have no health insurance. Many of you are underinsured with high deductibles and co-payments. And every day we're getting ripped off by the drug companies who charge us the highest prices in the world. And then to add insult to injury, we end up spending far, far more per capita on health care than do the people of any other country on earth. And that is why I believe we have got to take on the drug companies, take on the insurance companies, and pass a Medicare for all single payment program. Let me tell all of you, Donald Trump will not become President of the United States. Become president because in every national and virtually every state poll we are beating him by double-digit numbers. He will not become president because the American people will never elect a candidate who insults Mexicans and Latinos, who insults Muslims and women, who insults veterans, who insults the African American community. And I want you all to remember something which a lot of people have forgotten. Before he announced his candidacy for president, Trump was one of the leaders of the so-called Birther movement. Remember that? Now, the Birther movement was an incredibly ugly and vicious effort to undermine the legitimacy of the first African American president in the history of this country. It was not an effort to say we disagree with Obama. You can disagree with Obama. It was an effort to say that because this man is black, he wasn't really born in America, he should not be president of the United States. Now, I have always found it interesting. My father was born in Poland, immigrated to this country. President Obama's father was born in Kenya. Yet isn't it interesting, nobody has ever asked me for my birth certificate.
Hey guys, it's been a week shredding up Chicago. Hey Ma, can you give me some pops from the icebox? And I don't want to sauce in it, 'cause I'm from Chicago. Chicago. So watch me rocking them in Chicago. Oh.
What does it mean to live a moral life? When we talk about morality and when we talk about justice, we have to understand that there is no justice when so few have so much and so many have so little. There is no justice when the top 1/10 of 1% owns almost as much wealth as the bottom 90%. Millions of people are working long hours for abysmally low wages, working hard, but unable to bring in enough money to adequately feed their kids. There is no justice when the United States of America has the highest rate of childhood poverty of any major country on earth. How can we talk about morality, about justice, when we turn our backs on the children of our country? We have in this country sufficient amounts of money to put more people in jail than any other country on earth. But apparently we do not have enough money to provide jobs and education to our young people. We are the only major country on earth that does not guarantee health care to all people as a right. All of God's children, the poor, the wretched, they have a right to go to a doctor when they are sick.
I want you to think of what this great country can be. We can be a nation which joins other nations around the world in guaranteeing health care.